at one route only, and that is by Westminster devolving or giving more responsibility to Scotland. Indeed, even if there was a referendum, and even if there was a positive vote by the people of Scotland, I would say to you this: it would lead to instant independence. It would lead to a long and complicated set of negotiations for disengagement. And then there would be a further referendum, a further vote on the final negotiated package. So let's be clear here. Westminster has a really important part to play in the constitutional future of Scotland. And Westminster is the place where we've got to convince either the powers to be devolved to Scotland to give votes to 16-year-olds, or for Westminster to take that decision itself, because I believe the same argument applies just as strongly for elections right across the UK.
I can understand where you're going from this, but you know, we couldn't convince the Westminster government that Scotland didn't want unique elections dumped from the Clyde, and a majority of Scottish MPs voted against it when the Scottish Parliament has already said that we don't want it. We couldn't convince the Westminster government to listen to the Scottish people when we said they wanted a war in Iraq. They're not with the rest of the UK. So what we took on to do when we want something that they're clearly opposed to? Why don't the Scottish people the democratic right to choose their own future for themselves? Especially when you talked about Nicol earlier, saying that there's not much support for independence, but one poll was published recently that said that 80% of Scots want a referendum. Why not just give Scots a referendum? Why not be liberal? Why not be democratic and give that choice?
Well, I think I've answered a lot of these questions. You may not agree with my answers to these questions, but at my heart, I believe in making a difference rather than making just a stance, a public stance on these issues. And I still think that Scotland's influence on the world, the influence of Scots around the world, is greater through cooperation, through working to deliver the sort of changes in terms of the environment, in terms of war and peace, to have the sort of influence that we have in UK politics and European politics, rather than us standing aside and going for separation as inevitably a small nation on this planet. Now, I don't, you know, if Scotland, if the people of Scotland voted in an election, for a majority of them voted for parties that support independence, then of course there could be a referendum. That's only democratic. There would then be a referendum. But until that time, I will continue to fight the cause and to fight the case and to argue really strongly that Scots should be working with other nations, work with the English and the Welsh, the Irish, the rest of Europe, trying to make Europe and the world a better, safer place. And I would argue that across the piece, over the years, over the decades, Scotland has had a very big and very positive impact on the world. And I believe that part of the reason for that is our influence within the United Kingdom and our influence across Europe. And I believe in using that influence. I think increasingly on issues like nuclear disarmament, on issues like climate change and the environment, they won't even be tackled at the national level. Increasingly they'll be tackled through international cooperation. And that's why Europe, that's why institutions like the United Nations are so important. And the great shame in relation to the war in Iraq was not that we didn't have an independent Scotland. I mean, who's kidding themselves that if we had an independent Scotland, there wouldn't have been a war in Iraq? England and the United States, predominantly the United States and George W. Bush, would still have gone to war. And the great shame there was that the institution of the United Nations was ignored, and that we ended up being tied into an illegal war. I feel as bad about that, I hope, as many of the people in this room, but I don't think the answer is Scottish independence. Yeah.
Do you think the reasonable people in the Westminster Liberal Democrats has reflected well on them? Do you think a new leader will make a big difference, or will it be the same ideas we want to this?
I think a leadership contest. I think the fact we've got two very strong candidates in Nick Clegg and Chris Hume I think that will be good for the party. The membership of the party will go up as a result of the leadership contest. The party will receive more coverage, more media attention, more publicity. You'll probably see in the next 24 hours a couple of opinion polls that show our support nudging upwards, and that's the reason for it. I still think it's very sad that Mick Campbell was effectively forced to resign in the circumstances that he did. I think it, as I was saying earlier, it's good that young people are involved in politics, but there's a place for older people too, and I don't think we should I think some of the criticisms of him were very harsh indeed. Some of the cartoons and some of the sketches and some of the articles that were written about him made it very, very, very difficult for him. And as soon as Gordon Brown called off the general election, which he was certainly planning, as soon as he took fright when Cameron caught up in the opinion polls, it was clearly going to be, the issue of Mick Campbell and his age was not going to go away, and in 2 years' time, when the election is likely to be called, the issue would have been all the greater because he would have been 2 years older. So it's as simple as that. So I think it's sad. It's not a good reflection on the sort of attitude, the sort of celebrity, short-term, superficial attitude of certain aspects of politics in the UK at the start of the 21st century. But in terms of the future for the party, we've got two individuals, both of whom could be very strong leaders.
I mean, the thing I took from that, I mean, I thought it was a little sad or reflection that the party themselves didn't think that the public would be able to see past the candidate's age. But I thought, I mean, maybe they weren't really showing the electorate enough respect.
Well, there were some people in the party, some voices in the party that were being critical, but no parliamentarian, certainly no member of the House of Commons or the Scottish Parliament or the European Parliament. There were some from the House of Lords, to be fair, which is a bit ironic in itself, is it not? Some of the people who were being critical were non-elected and rather elderly themselves because of their age, because of their background, and some of the sniping, most of the sniping came from that source. That was unfortunate in my view, but in a big political party, as you know, you have the occasional crack, the occasional division, the occasional outspoken voice. Very often that renegade voice gets disproportionate coverage or publicity. But his parliamentary party was solidly behind him and would have backed him all the way through an election. In fact, one of my colleagues was saying that within minutes of him saying exactly that in a radio interview, he heard that Mick Campbell had resigned. So, you know, the MPs held the line, held their support right through until the point at which Mick Campbell announced his resignation. And it came as a surprise to many of us, including me. Yeah?
On the issue of the leadership, can you tell us what the differences are between the two candidates? Because I think there are many people, non-Liberal Democrats, who look at the two candidates and cannot really see any clear differences between them. It essentially seems a choice between two personalities, rather than there being a genuine choice in terms of policies, in the way that there was within the Conservative Party, for example. Given that, do you think that do you think it really should be taking so long for the Lib Dems to choose a leader, or could it be speeded up?
Well, we believe in one member, one vote, and to do that you need to allow a period of time for nominations. Once nominations have closed, you've got to allow a short period for people to put out their manifesto, their leaflet, urging individuals to vote for them. You've then got to mail shop the entire party. You've then got to allow time for them to consider how they're going to vote. You've then got to allow time for the post to come back in. You've got to have hustings events around the country. You know, it leads to a timetable that's going to be a couple of months rather than a couple of weeks. And that's what we've got. We'll know by the middle of December, which is not so very long away, who the new leader of the party will be. And you're right, they do have a very similar background. Chris Huhne and Nick Clegg, they both went to the same school, amazingly. They're both journalists, amazingly. They both were members of the European Parliament until they decided to switch to the House of Commons.